The bodies the authorities found in the middle of the park, laid out in the dead of night, were torn to shreds. A killer, or beast unseen, had struck them in a flurry, striking whilst everyone slept. Their skins were pale, blood sucked away. Their clothes were torn. Their limbs were snapped. One by one, the members of the HOA fell, their greed and power picked off one by one, and yet they still carried an air of pretension and superiority. My name is Quentin Loreno. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families. I arrange diplomatic marriages. I keep things civil. But above all, I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money, and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality. And I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. Today was a day off. On days off, I usually plugged in one of our many gaming consoles onto one of the large screen televisions to play some games. But not today. No. Today I was busy signing off an import of a large crate of Sunheim root, a rare herb grown only in Sketsky, Serpent Head, temples, that causes one to hallucinate several possible futures. That was when Stephen, great assistant as he was, approached me. "Quentin," he greeted, helping me carry the crate. "I've got a request to make." The words struck me as odd. Of my little team, Stephen was the quietest of the bunch, and on off days he spent his time with his family, away from the city and safe in suburbia. "It's an off day, Stephen," I pointed out. "You can do anything. Shouldn't you be with your family?" He nodded at that. "Aye, sir, but I need your help with something." He sounded sombre, and Stephen was never one for emotion. "I'm fighting the HOA in my neighbourhood. I could really use some help. I'm a bit too old to really connect with the kids." This was true. Stephen was quite old, and he worked for my father for over a decade before my father died, and the family business of the artifact black market fell to me. I owed him a favour. Probably many. "Sure. What are you fighting on?" He sighed solemnly as he put the crate down. "The Homeowners Association wants to build a new swimming pool and gym to replace Oldman Park. That park," there were distant memories in his eyes, "is one of the last few green spaces we have left. It means a lot for me, and I don't want to live to see it destroyed." This greatly puzzled me. I hadn't ever envisioned Stephen as an environmentalist. No. He always seemed neutral on politics whenever they came up. He always said he was too old to be making decisions for the young, and that was one of the things I truly respected about him. Stephen's cause sounded good enough. "I'll help you. Should I call Asta and Matt?" "No," Stephen declined. "This is something I want to keep between us." I finished logging the crate onto our database, and then we were off. Stephen owned a small van, which he drove to work every day, although I had always offered to convert one of the larger storehouses into a living space. We passed through the city fairly quickly. It was a weekend, and generally the city was never too crowded. A quarter of an hour later, and we were in rolling hills with the occasional group of markets, all identical. That was always something that had always tickled me somewhat. Outposts of stores all identical, anywhere in the world. Cookie-cutter style. Anywhere you went, there was a McDonald's. The store soon passed into a neighbourhood, and very soon we passed Oldman Park, construction already surrounding the place. They, Stephen informed, still have to vote on it before starting. The vote was today, and Stephen really needed help turning the crowd. He told me that they were stuck on an even split, and hoped a young voice such as mine would help raise some of the other youngsters to his cause. Stephen parked the van in front of a medium-sized building, just as cookie-cutter as the stores we'd seen earlier. This was Town Hall. "So, how exactly can I help?" I inquired, not entirely sure. "Should I say something? Pretend I'm an activist?" "If you like," Stephen suggested, shrugging. "I think having you by me will simply raise my confidence." I opted to mention whatever passers-by emerged to save Oldman Park. This went well, until we entered the main meeting room, a large, sterile white place with 4 members of the HOA sitting quite proudly. These are some of the ones against me, Stephen informed. We sat across from them, and I observed the group. They laid back on their phones, knitting, ignorant of our entrance. They seemed awfully, as Stephen would say, too old to be making decisions for the young. Stephen! An old woman with obnoxious, blonde-eyed, frizzled hair hissed. The renovations to Oldman Park will benefit us all. An old man who held a rosary crowed in. Think of our house prices. They'll go through the roof. The third one, a woman with a loudly barking chihuahua, spat. It'll make our neighbourhood so much nicer. Who really goes to that park? Stephen attempted to mention the families that did, but was silenced by the fourth member of the gang. A gym, pool, and a spa instead of a good-for-nothing park will open up so many more jobs too. But, I cut in, adamant to help my friend, you do realise this isn't for everyone, right? You know, studies suggest it's important to have at least one green space. Bah! A blonde-eyed woman, whom I'll name Karen, snapped. Who cares for those radical lies? First thing it's protecting the green space, and next thing it's our children. This elicited a look of puzzlement on both our faces. Who said anything about children? Stephen pointed out. Karen's face turned red. A flock of college-aged kids entered next, and they shook Stephen's hands, greeting him. They were the ones on his side, but even as they entered, a member of the oddly older, more hostile community poured in. Sorry, Steve. A cap-wearing man apologised, shirt filled with pins. My friends at the university think voting won't change anything. They only want to after bigger companies. It's all right, Jason, Stephen assured. We can fix this. I believe in you guys, I added. That didn't help at all. I couldn't vote anyway. I was starting to wonder what I should do. Voting began promptly, as head of the HOA, the chihuahua-toting lady, announced her plans to bulldoze the park and transform it into an elegant public spa, gym, and pool. Stephen argued against her next, telling the history of the place. The founders of the place, long before it, had sprouted into a suburb, were settlers who kept the park sacred, a place of meditation and study. The rosary-clutching man commented that they would build a church, so that all could meditate and study. Jason claimed it just wouldn't feel the same. On and on they argued while I sat, a bit lost on what to do, silently supporting Stephen and, as Karen mockingly called them, the greenies. All right, cool it, Chihuahua lady snapped, slamming her purse on the table. Let's vote. All in favour, say aye. The noise that followed was louder than the yapping of her dog. This many were in favour of destroying the park. So many, in fact, that the voters against could barely fight back. Then it's decided, Karen monotoned, a smile on her face. With a vote of 32-30, construction begins tomorrow. We're so blessed. House prices are going to soar. Stephen frowned and walked out of the room. I, and many others followed. We walked together back to the van in silence. We just kind of sat there for a while, before Stephen turned the key and started the van. I asked where we were heading next, and he told me it was the park. Parking in front of the construction work, he turned to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, it didn't go well, but I want you to know, I'm really glad you came. He paused and unbuckled his seatbelt. Your father never really helped me fight off the HOA. I've been doing it for the past decade. I guess it's over now. No. There was something more here. More than a simple park. Thanks. He walked out and I followed, wandering to the centre of the small yet open field. A great stone sat in the centre, frozen in time. The sun began to set, and the small streams around it glittered in the evening sun. It's not about the park, really, he continued, sitting in front of the stone. He touched it, and it seemed to glow. This is where I learned my magic. Stephen had served my father many years as his magician. He enchanted artefacts, drew protection sigils, and helped with virtually anything he needed, and he'd shown double the amount of work to protect me. This! I touched the rock. I didn't feel the sense of power that Stephen clearly did. He whispered something in a language I could not fathom to the rock. That was when I saw them. There were small people living on the rock. No. Now it wasn't a rock, but a bustling city lit by phalites and attended to by hundreds, no, thousands of people. Fairies, I gasped, shocked. I thought they'd all gone extinct. They were joyous in the way they carried themselves, ignoring the two of us. They fluttered here and there, bringing small crops to markets, strutting around happily, mindlessly whistling a tune. It was gorgeous, and now I understood why Stephen was so adamant on saving the park. Indeed, he confirmed, this is one of the last fairies to live. I remembered the history lessons my father had Stephen teach me. Lessons of the darker, more magical world, tales of industrialization and the horrors it brought about the little folk. Tiny bodies, invisible to all but the trusted, blackened by smog. Cities disguised as boulders and trees, crushed by the force of factories. Construction. Once upon a time, these beings had power. This time was long over. The dawn of steel and iron slew them by the thousands, for they were immune to all but the most refined of metals. And so we killed them. A silent, slow death. Genocide upon a million silent voices. I spent my childhood in this park, Stephen started, tears welling up in his eyes. I saw them when I was 6, and I brought them food at first, curious. It was hard to gain their trust, but eventually I did. In the distance, I could hear the shouts of a Chihuahua. I grew the city, and their queen, now dead, taught me magic. Stephen drew something in the air, a message of pure energy that drifted into the heart of the city. Your father never liked getting involved with fairy folk, but they gave me my everything, and I can't let them die. Can't they move? I suggested. They have nowhere else to go, Stephen revealed, sighing. On all 4 sides, they are surrounded with homes, cars, people. They would be destroyed. And the last truly green places on Earth are threatened every day. Fairies were once powerful. They will fight, Stephen finished. They won't leave, but they will fight, and I have done all I can. They sent their familiars to attack those who would harm them, but nothing has changed. He paused, eyeing 2 approaching figures, Karen and the woman with the dog. What happens here will likely be their last stand. And the 2 HOA members approached, staring at us with eyes as evil as the stones of Kabash and Earth. They shook their fists against us, as demons in the evening sun. Are you talking to a rock, Stephen? Karen hissed. Do you live here, old man? The dog-wielding woman snapped. At Oldman Park? He's gone senile, hasn't he? Karen mocked. And, she sized me up, whoever the hell you are. This is when the wind started. From a calm nothing came a whistling, and the skies began to clear, letting the full force of the sun beat down upon us. And then the wind began to swirl, and me and Stephen stepped back, behind the stone city. Scared? You should be happy we're improving. And then the wind screamed. It screamed as stray leaves and dust picked up, and I swear, it was creating a face. There was a face as real as the grass and sky in the wind, swirling. The cruel 2 snapped and snarled at us, ignorant of the mysticism. The dog's barks increased in tempo and sound, warning of the disaster that was to come. The figure in the wind manifested then, a swirling humanoid mass of leaves. And then the 2 HOA members screamed. It reached out a leafy, cutting appendage and covered Karen with its leaves, slicing and sucking her into the mess. What remained as it passed through her was a dead body, skin paler in colour and blood pouring out of her body, being vacuumed into the storm. Me and Stephen only watched as the creature, enchanted through fairy magic, chased the woman, absorbing her into its body and only leaving behind limbs, skin, and bones. The dog barked and fled the scene. The creature did not make chase. It faced us then, considered our efforts, and vanished into the wind, leaves and blades of grass settling gently. Should we hide the bodies? I asked. Leave them here, Stephen decided. Perhaps they will treat this as a sign. I shook my head. It was unlikely. The vote was 32-30, I reminded. With these 2 gone. It's a tie. Call an emergency redo or something. The body should delay construction for what? A week or so? A moment's pause came then. You're right, Stephen concluded. We can still make this work. I had an idea then. I can get Asta. Her gift may come in handy. Stephen understood my plan then. Asta's gift allowed her to reach into the minds of the weak. I assumed all HOA members were just as weak and frail as they looked on the outside. If we were lucky, she, perhaps, could uncover memories of the park, nostalgia, or perhaps dark secrets we could use as blackmail material. As we drove back to the auction house, Stephen mused over the fairies' lore. Their constructs of nature and flesh were powerful things, but beyond the park, their power was limited by bits of metal and iron within the neighbourhood. At best, perhaps a spirit fox or a lower-tier golem. At worst, maybe a light that induced light paranoia. Things were not looking good for the fairies. I floated the idea of relocating them to the auction house, but it simply wasn't green enough. No connection with nature. No direct bond to freedom. No, they would have to stay, and we would have to fight. I wondered why I was helping Stephen and the fairies. It didn't affect me in any way, whether they die or survive, besides my good conscience perhaps. But something deep within me told me this was the right thing to do, to save the endlings of an already dead race. That was it. I posted a surprise closure on my website for the next day. I lied about a leak in the water, intending to gather my team to stop the HOA. Now, I began, having gathered all 4 of us into my office, I'm sure you're wondering why we're closed today. Another day off, Matt guessed, optimistic. Stephen spoke next, telling his tale about our journey to the park and the vote we saw. He told of his childhood, of how he gained their trust and was taught the ancient arcane arts from the very source of all things magical. He pleaded for us to save the Fae, and to Asta and Matt's credit, they listened and agreed. You want me to rough them up? Matt suggested, flexing his muscles. I may have no magic or nothing, but I've hunted monsters since the day I turned 16. Nothing like that, I declined. I guess you can come for intimidation support. I told Asta the plan to uncover distant nostalgia and dark secrets to convince them to vote for the park. I can do that, she affirmed. Anything to help a friend. I'll call an emergency meeting, Stephen decided, now realising there was a chance. I can say that the deaths of Barbara and Karen, so her name really was Karen, puts the community out of balance. Then let's do this, I cheered, already stepping out of the door. We took Stephen's van. Also, he was the only one who drove to work. I lived inside the building sometimes, and Asta and Matt both had apartments. City turned to cookie-cutter stores, and those stores turned to the suburbs. And before we knew it, we were there. Stephen's post had drawn enough members in to redo the vote, and we'd arrived a whole hour earlier to convince the people. I and Asta would head one direction and go door to door, while Stephen and Matt would do the same. Armed with magic, flyers, our wizened words, and a psychic, we were ready for anything, especially an evil HOA bent on increasing the value of their homes. Hope, nostalgia, and the dying power of the Fae were on our side. Maybe not so much that last part. Me and Asta made quick work of the first row of houses, elderly couples who invited us in for tea. Most supported us, but were far too unconcerned to vote. I spun terrifying stories of a generation unable to see the green, and Asta reached within to evoke waves of nostalgia. We had mixed results. Don't you wish your kids could see that park too, and play? I insisted. I don't have kids, an old tie-wearing man informed. Okay, but what about other people's kids? I repeated. Asta reached in to evoke nostalgia. I hate children, the man insisted. 6 times out of 10, we were successful. And to me, that was a good sign, especially as the hour drew to a close. The house of the rosary-pressing man was last on our journey, and as we stepped on his porch, we wondered if our mission would ring true. Hi, I began, as the man opened the door. I'm wondering if you'd like to change your thoughts on the park. No, he silenced. Construction is going to make this place rich. Sir, Asta spoke, reaching in as she did, by the time housing prices soar, you'll likely be dead. But my children can reap the benefits, he insisted, wagging a finger in our faces. Asta grimaced, as she found a particularly distasteful memory. You... Something glimmered in her eyes. Don't talk to your children often. They don't believe in the same cause as you do. What makes you think they'll appreciate this? Because I said so, that's why. He paused, stunned. How the hell did you know? Asta cut him off. Doing this for your children won't make them hate you any less, but perhaps talking to them and saving the park will help your kids more. Aye. He stopped and slammed the door behind him. Well, that went well, I decided. My watch rang. It's time. The team regrouped and together, with the new rising army of the young, the middle, the old behind us, we were ready to vote. We had spread the word. Only by participating within the small-scale world could one truly make a difference. Life, I assumed, was like that. 1,000 small things that added up into something truly real. Each small member, each person added to the accumulation of the vote we would have today. In the trees and shadows, brilliant foxes and lights watched us closely. Their survival bordered on our words, and I didn't want to see any other person, greedy HOA member or not, get killed by the whimsical spirits of nature. As Karen nor Barbara are here, Rosaryman began, I am in charge. Today we're gathered in the name of the Lord, construction, to determine the fate of Oldman Park. He paused and scanned the audience. I know we're divided over this topic. Some of us want that new spa and gym. Some of us want to preserve the park. So let us discuss. Stephen spoke next. I've lived here all my life, and this park has brought me countless memories. Days skipping across with butterflies, drawing things in the dirt, basking against the sun. Surely you would not deprive your children. He eyed Rosaryman. We'd informed him of Asta's discovery, of these fine memories. The crowd rumbled in both agreement and disagreement. Asta reached beyond the veil, tugging at the very heart of the community. Then let us vote, struck the man with the rosary. And personally, I have decided to keep the park. And so we voted. To vote for both the soul of the community and for the survival of a species. For Stephen's memories. For my conscience. A step forward in a brighter path. The vote concludes, Stephen shouted, taking all the ballots. He and Rosaryman counted. 64 to 38, in favour of preservation. A wide, joyous smile crept up his face. We had succeeded. Our will had preserved. I found myself with Stephen hours later, walking the trail of the park, slowly making our way to the centre. Asta and Matt had returned. There were still more boxes to catalogue at the house. Thank you, Stephen said, as we approached the stone, bristled with more life than ever. Spirit creatures danced around us, only seen to our eyes and the moon. Your father was deep in the world of the artifact, but you've shown me that there's a new side to the trade, a less criminal, good side. Thank you, Stephen, I echoed. You've served both my father and me. Thank you for being with us. He laughed heartily and looked within my eyes with an old, wizened stare. My debts to your family are long from being fully paid, but I'm happy to serve for many years to come. And we watched the small folk upon their city, blissfully ignorant of the outside world, safe in their last citadel of safety. Even as their species came to an end, did they find the smallest moments to live, to dance, to truly enjoy. And yet, as small and insignificant as they were, their survival touched my heart, and it was then when I truly realised how significant even the smallest things could be. And though I was scared of the beasts the fairies had summoned, the thought of victory was good enough to assuade me.